Good evening and welcome to Northbeat. I'm Lainey Lambrink. You've probably heard a thing or two about heat pumps lately. The federal government is trying to incentivize people into using them for home heating. Almost 100 Yukon homes have them installed, and some NWT homes do too. They're currently being studied in the NWT as an alternative to heating fuel. But how do they hold up in Arctic climates? Robert Holden looks into that for us.
And this auger brings it into the heating bin, and then that automatically runs through the boiler as it's running.
Heat pumps made the news last month, part of a federal pause on carbon tax for heating oil. That pause is so more people can install the pumps in their homes. They're a form of electric heating, supposed to be more efficient than other kinds of heat. But questions remain about how cold it can get before they stop being effective. The Arctic Energy Alliance is working with NWT Housing to study how feasible these devices are in the NWT. They're test driving 2 in Yellowknife. With a report due soon, the organization says it might be too early to make a call on whether they're viable. One thing's for certain, as the temperature drops, so does the efficiency of the unit.
One of the things we're finding is that the manufacturer's specifications as to sort of where they start to lose efficiency are a little bit overestimated. So in reality, and this is one of the reasons we do real-world testing of this type of equipment, we're seeing that, around -15, -20, that's kind of when it starts to lose its efficiency.
In Fort Smith, Standalone Energy Systems has been using heat pumps since 2017. Owner Dennis Bevington says the region has a leg up. The slightly warmer climate allows the device to operate as expected. Further north could be a different story, with the potential for higher energy requirements and higher electricity bills.
I don't see that right now that it's viable in Yellowknife, but in the South Slave in Fort Smith, it certainly is viable as an alternative.
Bevington believes newer models that have heat storage features will be key to the North moving away from diesel fuel. And the device doesn't just warm a space.
It's interesting with climate change and a warming planet. We often didn't think of air conditioning as a major need in the North, but that stands to change in the years ahead as well. So I think that equipment that can provide both heating and cooling in the summertime when we may need it, whereas we may not have needed it 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, I think will gain in popularity.
Hike says we'll likely have to keep current heating systems in place for the foreseeable future. There are plans to expand the project next fiscal year with additional housing units. Robert Holden, CBC News, Yellowknife.
It's less than a week before the NWT election. Enterprise is still reeling from a devastating wildfire season, and rebuilding that community is a top priority, but so is land ownership. Carla Ulrich has more.
Enterprise Mayor Michael St. Amour's days are centered around how to rebuild and get residents back into his community. Most of Enterprise burned up in a wildfire in mid-August, and right now he has no clear answers.
I want to see all the residents back into homes, the properties all cleaned up the way they're supposed to be, and happiness. There's no joy in the town anymore. There's no children. I want to see the kids back here. I want to see everybody back at work, and I want to see this community grow as a unit.
Amour added that he wants transparency and accountability from their next MLA and cautioned candidates not to make promises they can't keep. For example, Enterprise resident Jim Dives said there are big issues from the election 4 years ago that still need to be taken care of. He said it's been over 10 years that the community has been fighting the GNWT to hand over land titles, but that still has not been completed. And Dives says he now has been told his lot, ravaged in August by fire, needs to be cleared before that can happen.
Because of the fire now, everything is being postponed or stopped again because of MACA's regulations. And it's just frustrating when you've got an equity lease and it's paid off, and now because there's been a fire, now my lot has to be cleared before I can get title. It doesn't make sense.
Dives said the delay prevents new development in the community, and he hopes their next MLA will take this issue seriously. Carla Ulrich, CBC News, Fort Smith.
We've heard that the cost of living is another major election issue, and this year it's an even bigger issue for people in the Sawtoo because of a spotty barge season. Low water levels on the Mackenzie River and wildfire evacuations in Hay River both stopped most of the summer barges from reaching their destinations. The mayor of Norman Wells says that means food has become more expensive and there's been a sharp increase in demand at the food bank. He says one solution is to build the Mackenzie Valley Highway.
I think the government's going to have to take a stronger line with some of these positions. They're going to have to get after the federal government for more money and get building that road. And the way the plans with the GNWT are, 2037, we could have that damn road built. 2037 is laughable. It's a joke.
The highway would connect Norman Wells to the territory's highway system. Pope says whomever gets elected this time around will have a lot of work to do. The NWT Association of Communities held a series of candidate forums today. They were divided into north of Great Slave Lake and south of it and the Yellowknife area. Des Lorene has more.
The forums all happened online. During the first session, only 2 of the 10 invited candidates made the call. Denny Rogers, running for Inuvik Boot Lake, and Lisa Semler, the incumbent MLA for Inuvik Twin Lakes. The 2 themes of the day were climate change and community government funding. NWTAC President Rebecca Alty led the questioning. Both Inuvik candidates on the call said they would advocate for more money into the communities. Rogers says that there's enough Crown land in Inuvik that could be converted to create local revenues from that. NWTAC Vice President Ray Rubin pressed the candidates about climate change. Semler said the best approach would be collaborative but autonomous between the GNWT and the communities. Additional sessions were held for candidates below the Great Slave Lake and in the Yellowknife area. Des Lorene, CBC News, Inuvik.
A highly unusual case about an attempt to influence Yellowknife City Council was settled in a courtroom last month. A man who helped implement territory-wide 911 service in the NWT pleaded guilty to that. Ashley Garrity admitted to sending a phony email to Yellowknife's mayor and council pretending to be from the NWT Fire Chiefs Association. He tried to convince them to shut down the city's emergency dispatch and rely on the territory's 911 service instead. He was given a conditional discharge and 1 year of probation. That means he won't have a conviction on his record if he abides by the conditions of that probation. The head of the National Inuit Organization is calling out a group in Labrador that's self-identifying as Indigenous. Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami President Natan Obed says the Nunatu-Kavut Community Council's claims to Inuit rights aren't legitimate. Obed wrote an open letter to federal leaders and Canadians this week about the issue. The Nunatu-Kavut Council was first incorporated in 1986 as the Labrador Métis Association. Its leaders identified publicly as Métis until 2010, when they became Nunatu-Kavut and claimed Inuit status. Obed is urging the Canadian government to rebuff the council.
The federal government's responses have been completely unacceptable. The government of Canada has been in the business of justifying indigeneity. We went through it as Inuit, the rigorous tests that were put forward by the Crown so that we would prove that we were Inuit collectives at the time of assertion of sovereignty of Canada.
Nunatu-Kavut claims it represents 6,000 Inuit in southern and central Labrador. It says Obed's claims are defamatory. It says ITK is trying to erase its history. The council has yet to prove it has constitutionally protected Indigenous rights, but in 2019, Ottawa recognized the group as Indigenous. That recognition has since been challenged by several Indigenous groups. Nunavut's Legislative Assembly is drawing criticism for education equality. Today marks the second day of the Assembly's midterm review. It means MLAs are taking a look at promises the government has made and whether those promises have been upheld. The MLA for Arviat South criticized the availability of academic courses in high school. He says students in his community can't take the courses they need to get into university.
I truly believe that Nunavut is going to a two-tier education system. You have the students that are in Akharir here have all the teachers and the courses that they need, and then you go to the outlying communities, and they're just not there.
Education Minister Pamela Gross countered this. She says academic courses are available to students in Arviat. Gross also says there are options to learn online when certain classes aren't available in person. What do wildfires mean for city planning? It's the question city officials in Whitehorse are asking themselves. They're in the midst of updating the city's wildfire risk map, and they're working with a researcher in Alaska on that. Jen Schmidt has spent decades helping the city understand wildfire risk. She says growing urban density could be increasing the area's risk level.
My research in Alaska shows that if you have a building within 30 meters, you're very likely to have your building burn, because once a fire gets in there, it just acts as fuel and goes from building to building. So thinking about when you say are expanding or developing lots around Whitehorse, is the lot large enough for a homeowner to do fire smart and take control of their wildfire risk on their property? Or are you packing houses close together?
Schmidt says wildfire risk factors should become part of the city's building codes.
November 11th, the most unforgettable day of the year. A message from the Government of Canada.
The Territory is choosing its next government, and CBC has everything you need to know before you cast your ballot. Get the stories and promises that shape the campaign on television, radio, and digital. NWT votes on CBC.
You are constantly on the move, and so are we, making sense of the moments that matter together.
Looks like things are maybe winding down.
Asking what, why, when.
To the center of the biggest stories, meeting the people living them.
Thank you for letting us be here. What's your situation?
Making sense of our world.
How are we going to be part of this solution?
With you and for you.
Connectedness, groundedness.
I'm Adrienne Arsenault. This is The National.
Canadians of generations have been miseducated.
But we don't talk about that.
We are here. We have been here.
These stories are us.
Yeah!
Yeah, dog! Oh, an absolute classic.
All right.
Let's go! Yeah!
This is The National.
Every week, the issues that matter to Canadians.
These are acts of desperation.
Connecting politics to people.
Some people have lost everything.
Join me for Rosemary Barton Live.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and several other members of Parliament are calling out anti-Semitism. There has been an increase in the number of high-profile threats against Jewish people and institutions across Canada since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. The CBC's Kate McKenna has more.
Canada's Prime Minister with a dire warning.
We're seeing right now a rise in anti-Semitism that is terrifying. This is not who we are as Canadians. This is something that is not acceptable in Canada, period.
His comments follow multiple reports of threats against Jewish people and institutions. Montreal police are investigating the remnants of Molotov cocktails at a West Island synagogue and a nearby Jewish community center.
We just had a firebombing at the Beth Tikva synagogue where I grew up in Dollard des Ormeaux, and it is not something that we could take lightly. It is really important that police need to crack down now.
Quebec lawmakers are also calling for a police investigation into comments made by this controversial imam, Adil Sharkawi. He made a speech calling for the extermination of Zionist aggressors.
From my perspective, they seem to have crossed the line and gone into criminal speech, hate speech. I've never seen a time when Jewish Canadians have felt as scared, as angry, as frustrated in a country that we've been part of since before Confederation existed.
This is a terrible time in our history. The Jewish community is rightfully scared, and I never thought in my lifetime I'd see anti-Semitism like this in our streets.
Jewish advocacy organizations say anti-Semitism was on the rise before the war between Israel and Hamas, but things are getting worse.
What we see today, as we saw in the West Island, is the continued deterioration of the conditions against the Jewish community.
The federal government pledged an additional $5 million this week. It's for communities that could be targets of hate-motivated attacks. They're able to apply for funding and do things like hire temporary private security. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa. A new international report is ranking Canada's health system in comparison to other countries. It says overall Canada is doing well, but as Christine Burak reports, there's room for improvement.
How does health in Canada stack up against dozens of other mainly high-income democratic countries?
Good morning, everyone.
The latest report from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, shows Canada is doing relatively well, performing better than average on 75% of health status indicators.
I think Canadians might be surprised regarding how Canada performs on many of these indicators.
Compared to the OECD average, Canada is doing better than most when it comes to life expectancy, which is about 82. Far more people over 65 are in good health. Smoking rates are lower. More Canadians are eating fruits and vegetables. And the vast majority of people who break their hip have surgery within 2 days.
I think is a milestone to say, here's where you're doing really well. Here's where you have some problems.
Compared to the OECD average, problems include diabetes is more prevalent, the number of opioid deaths are much higher, and when it comes to access to care, on average, Canadians are less satisfied.
Then the question is, well, does that require spending more, or does it require spending differently?
Canada is spending more on health than the OECD average, but not as much as other governments, including the UK and Germany. Canada also has fewer practicing physicians per 1,000 people than both countries, which includes family doctors and specialists, contributing to a lack of access or appointments and frustrating wait times for scheduled surgeries.
Workforce is a top priority for health system strengthening.
Provincial and territorial leaders are promising changes and more collaboration, but experts say there are no quick fixes for healthcare, and training more doctors will take time. Christine Burak, CBC News, Toronto.
Today is Indigenous Veterans Day, a national day to recognize First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples who've served in the Canadian military past and present. Canada's Defence Minister says Indigenous peoples have been an integral part of Canada's military for more than 200 years. Thousands of Indigenous soldiers served in both World Wars. More than 2,700 are part of the Canadian Armed Forces today.
For over 200 years, Indigenous people have been and continue to be an integral part of Canada's military history. From the World Wars to the Korean War to countless United Nations missions, Indigenous service members have made outstanding contributions to Canada, often by using their own specialized skills as scouts, snipers, and code talkers. Despite their service and sacrifice during these conflicts, many Indigenous veterans endured hatred and systemic racism while they served, and when they returned to Canada, they did not always receive the same benefits, honors, or respect as non-Indigenous veterans. In 1994,
Blair says the first Indigenous Veterans Day was back in 1994, and it's grown ever since. There are events scheduled to honor Indigenous veterans in Whitehorse and Yellowknife tonight. And you might see people wearing beaded poppies, like the one that I'm wearing right now. This one was made by Loretta Wiley and Norman Wells. Joyce Hunter, a traditional artist from Winnisk First Nation in Ontario, makes beaded poppies too. The CBC's Mark Doucette visited her while she was working on some and learned about what today means to her.
Beading is beautiful. Beading is who we are as First Nations people, Indigenous people. It is an extension of who we are. My name is Joyce Hunter and I am a beader from Winnisk First Nation. We know that the poppy came to represent veterans and survival and of the protection of rights and freedoms, and that's beautiful in and of its own. And then for us as First Nations people, what we did when this country became a country was we took treaties with our partners, and then there were global catastrophes that happened that triggered wars, and when that happened, our people, they stepped up to the plate, and they did that to protect their treaties. They did that because they were going to honor that treaty that they took with their partners, because if the other side didn't exist, their treaties wouldn't exist. And so they signed up in order to uphold the agreement that they made, because to them it was a sacred agreement. And my maternal great uncle, he went to serve in the First World War, and he passed away actually as a result of the Spanish flu. And it's very important to me as a First Nation member to honor him and represent him and others like him well. I really like the fact that it represents indigeneity in such a strong way, and it's also very beautiful. You know, like, people get to wear that, carry that, because, like I said, there's such a huge story behind, you know, that fighting for that freedom, fighting for that treaty, making sure that relationship holds strong, and the protection of all those things, the respect for that. There's a lot of meaning behind it, and I think that's important.
A group of women from Mayo, Yukon are in Northern Europe this week. They're in the traditional territory of the Indigenous Sami people. It's part of a cultural exchange, sewing together both local and pan-Northern connections. Cheryl Kawaja has the details.
This one I made for my nephew with a little crow on it. That's the back. And then the front has a little crow.
Eager to share her work with the Sami people, Erin Prophet is proud of the skills she's learned over the last few years.
I've learned a lot of new beading techniques, using the sewing machine.
The sewing courses in Mayo have been tremendously successful. The fashion show last year showcased some of the new talent.
They have absolutely blossomed through all of these different programs. We've had people who have never used a sewing machine who now are whipping up baby anoraks in succession for everyone that they know.
With not so much room to bring gifts and examples of their work,
The explosion.
Sandy Washburn has done her best to pack this suitcase.
Beading kit.
The sewing courses in Mayo over the last few years coincided with a very difficult period for the community. At one point, there was a state of emergency because of the overdoses and opioid deaths. But through it all, the sewing program was a source of strength.
It made us bond really good with the women that were in it. We all bonded through sewing and our sewing machines and needles and thread, and yeah, just good positive energy.
Now, this cultural exchange with the Sami is a sign of that strength and hope.
I am most excited to see what happens after we get back. I have a feeling the inspiration level is going to be through the roof and the creative juices will be flowing, and I cannot wait to see what people like Erin do with what they've learned over there.
With a lot of community support, the group left Mayo for Whitehorse this week, then flew to Northern Europe for 18 days in Finland and Norway. Today, the Mayo group had its first video call from the Sami Institute in Norway, connecting with people back home.
Oh, good. We're gonna do show and tell.
Hey.
the camera.
The Sami have had big success with language revitalization.
We're one of their sewing studios.
With a cell phone, the visiting Yukoners gave a quick tour of the facility to the people at home, showing things like the sewing rooms and workshops at the Institute. The group hopes to come back not only inspired themselves, but sharing what they've learned with others. Cheryl Kawaja, CBC News, Whitehorse.
And that's Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, head to cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. I'm Lainey Lambrink. Have a great night.
Time to see who your next government will be.
Join us Tuesday at 7:30 for CBC Votes Election Night Special.
Results, reaction, and analysis live on CBC Television, CBC Gem, CBC North, Radio 1, and our CBC North YouTube page.
And join me here in the People's Hall at CBC Yellowknife and watch the show live.
NWT Votes, Tuesday at 7:30 on CBC.
You're not a millennial.
Yeah, well, Dr. Dre's not a doctor. I feel like such an imposter.
You need money to survive.
He had something to hide.
Try typing with your thumbs.
What do you call it?
It's called a BlackBerry.
Huh. We call them crackberries.
There's a serial killer on the loose.
2 attacks in a week.
Go on. Everybody's got something to hide.
We're not gonna be here forever, right? Makes me want to make some changes.
Your family can't take much more.
Think you're a better driver when you're high? Think again. No alcohol, no drugs, no victims. A message from Mad Canada.
I want my children home where they should be.
You'll go to jail if you don't sign.
There's gonna come a time you'll feel the darkness. You don't let them win.
Your vote, your way. Click, stream, watch, listen. Get the facts before you head to the polls. NWT Votes on CBC.
I understand that you're struggling emotionally.
Sure you want to do this?
I mean, it's research, right? You need to stop asking me for things I can't give you. You've done it my whole life.
We have an incredible show lined up for you tonight. Wow!
Get the news
resources you need without restrictions.
We have an incredible show lined up for you tonight.